happening, but it is something that we as Australians need to take action about. Because while Liu Xiaobo, Nobel Peace Prize winner, a champion of justice and human rights, while he is being mistreated by the Chinese government, it is reflecting back on us as Australians. So I hope, but I'm not certain, that our Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who's in Germany for the G20 this weekend, is he raising these issues with the Chinese Premier? He needs to be, because China need to know that it matters to us as Australians, that they are respectful of human rights, and clearly they're not. It is awful what's happening to Liu Xiaobo. It's also awful to other political prisoners in China. I had the privilege of meeting just a few weeks ago in Parliament in Canberra the family of a Tibetan young man. I need to check on my phone. Hold on. Dondat Wangchen. And Dondat Wangchen was a Tibetan man who was arrested for making a film about what the reality of life in Tibet was, and to be speaking out for the human rights of Tibetans. He was then imprisoned. He's been now released from prison, but he is not able to travel. The Chinese authorities will not give him a visa to travel. So I had the privilege of meeting his elderly parents and his brother, who are now settled here in Australia. They desperately want to see their son before they die, but at the moment China are not issuing him a visa. And of course there are other activists, the human rights activists, the Falun Gong activists, who are political prisoners and having their rights completely crushed by the Chinese government. So good on you for being here today and for speaking up, and I will let you know that for me, as a Green Senator in our Parliament, I will continue with my colleagues to speak up for human rights across the world, but particularly to keep the pressure up, and we need to make sure that our government keeps the pressure up on China until we can have human rights in China, until we can really proudly have that economic relationship and feel good about it, because we know that there is justice in China as well. And at the moment that's not the case. So keep up the good work, and I look forward to working with you into the future.
Thank you very much, Senator Janet. Good afternoon, everyone. I feel upset today to come here. Why? We just want people to pay attention to the human rights situation in China. And also we want everyone to support Dr. Liu Xiaobo. We want to appeal on the Chinese government to give the full freedom of Dr. Liu Xiaobo, to let him to see anyone in the last day of his life. This is human rights. Dr. Liu Xiaobo is fighting for the human rights and the democracy of China for all his whole life. And he has been in the prison for 9 years. He has the cancer, liver cancer, advanced liver cancer. He is closing to death. And we want him to see anyone, to talk to anyone with his life. Especially the Chinese people, I want you to come here to support us, to Dr. Liu Xiaobo. To support Dr. Liu Xiaobo is to support to China. It's support to the human rights in China. It's support to the human rights of all the Chinese people, including the sister and brothers, including your brother and your sisters in China. Okay. Today, we still have the other big speaker, Mr. Peter Westmore, the president of the Australia National Civil Council. We want him to speak and to support Dr. Liu Xiaobo. and he always supported Chinese human rights activities all the time. We will give a welcome to Peter Westmore. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Frank, and it's a privilege to be asked to be with you this afternoon on this sad occasion, as we know that Dr. Liu Xiaobo is very gravely ill in a hospital in China, but as Frank indicated, is not able to meet with even his full family or other people who might be able to help him in these last days. We are actually greatly privileged to be able to speak about Dr. Liu Xiaobo because he is one of the heroes of our time. He is a man who, if he had wanted to, would have been able to live a much more comfortable life in the West. As Frank mentioned at the outset, he was actually in the United States at the time when the Tiananmen Square student uprising began. And he voluntarily went back to China to join the people who were attempting to bring democracy to China at that time, 1989. Very bravely, he was catapulted into a position of becoming a representative of the students who were protesting at that time, and was responsible for saving the lives of hundreds of students by persuading both the students in China to withdraw from Tiananmen Square before the massacre took place, and by persuading the army not to attack them. Nonetheless, as we now know, certainly hundreds, perhaps thousands of young lives were lost in the middle of Beijing at that time. This was a man who was incredibly brave and who, for standing up for human rights in China and for young student activists, and we have to remember here that our chairman was at that time himself a student at Beijing University. But he spoke publicly on behalf of those who were trying to protect human rights in China. He was arrested. He was imprisoned. A consequence of that was that his marriage broke down. He was subsequently forced out of Beijing University, where he had an important job as a university lecturer, and he had to live purely on the basis of his writings in a country where it was almost impossible to earn a living for a person who didn't have a job. He nonetheless continued to speak out. He was involved, as our chairman mentioned, in forming the International Human Rights Group Charter 2008. He was a president of PEN International in China, where he was involved in attempting to foster within Chinese society people who would be willing to stand up and speak and write freely. And for this, again, he was arrested, he was imprisoned. And not just imprisoned in a normal prison, but imprisoned in a place where people who were judged to have committed political crimes were incarcerated. And so, for simply speaking out, not for advocating the overthrow of the Chinese state, but for simply calling for reform in China, this very brave man was arrested. Again, it would have been possible for him even at that time to have left China. He did not leave China. He remained in the country. He attempted and has continued to peacefully put forward the idea that China and the Chinese people should be free. And for this, we must stand alongside him. And we must remember his heroic contribution to human rights, not just in China, but actually right throughout the world. This is a man of incredible courage. He is one of the true
heroes of our age. And it is a privilege to be asked to stand alongside him today. He is a hero. We must recognise his heroism, and we must say to him, Liu Xiaobo, we are honoured to stand alongside you as your life seems to be approaching its end because you're now suffering from liver cancer. I want to say two other things about this. The first is, it does appear that the Chinese government a month ago showed an act of compassion in releasing him from prison and putting him into a hospital where he could be at least given medical treatment in the last days of his life. I myself am rather cynical about this. I think the Chinese government released him because the President of China, Xi Jinping, was shortly to travel to Hamburg in Germany for the G20 meeting and did not want to be embarrassed by this very brave man continuing to be imprisoned, but in fact facing death in prison in China at the very time when Xi Jinping was trying to make a mark on the international stage. But for whatever reason, he was released from prison, and that is a good thing. But even in his position in hospital, he has not been given freedom to have other people whom he wishes to meet around him. He is restricted so that only his present wife is able to visit him in the hospital where he is detained. This is a man who is now being forced almost to die alone, and yet who has stood for freedom of speech now for nearly 30 years. And it is our privilege and our obligation to stand alongside him in these days. This is a great and heroic man. It is a huge privilege for us to be able to stand alongside him, to thank him for what he has done, and to say that his work has not been in vain, because his writings are now known right round the world, not merely for the fact that he has won the Nobel Peace Prize, a peace prize which, as we have heard, he was not able to receive in person. Not only that, the Chinese government even stopped him from nominating a person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize on his behalf, but his writings are now known throughout the West. And I am sure that despite everything which has happened to him, that the courage and the bravery, the heroism which he has shown will inspire millions of other people in China to carry on the great work which he has begun. And so I say, let us stand alongside Dr. Liu Xiaobo as he carries through this last phase of this great and courageous struggle in which he has been involved. It is a privilege to be asked to speak here today and to speak on behalf of him, and as an Australian to say that we are concerned about the issues of human rights in China, and we want to say to Dr. Liu Xiaobo that we stand alongside you and that we want to see that the struggle which you have begun is finally successful in China. Thank you.